Okay, then, so let's kick off. So, dear listener, welcome. I was going to say welcome back to the studio, but we are today at Rapha HQ. Some of you will now be shuddering with delight as Rapha customer addicts. Some of you may find it a new brand, but either way, to demystify and give us insight, it's a great pleasure to be here with Joel. So, Joel, Chief Commercial Officer of Rapha, welcome. Tell us a bit about Rapha and a bit about your role as Chief Commercial Officer.
For anyone who doesn't know, Rapha is a 20-year-old this year cycling brand started by Simon Mottram in 2004, sort of widely considered to have really changed the sport, changed the way people engage with the sport. Obviously a kind of glory time for British cycling as well, or certainly alongside that glory of British cycling. It's a global brand available all over the world with stores or clubhouses, as we call them, in several different countries. And then my role as Chief Commercial Officer, I'm very lucky to be able to work on some of the product and the product strategy. I work with the merchandising and supply chain teams, and then across the website, so digital product and e-commerce.
Great. Well, loads of avenues to go. But first off, let's try and anchor Rapha in the cycling landscape. So with cycling, it's such a broad brush because most people can cycle, most people have cycled, but Rapha sort of entered the market where sort of cycling was moving from being bearded old guys in cagoules doing tours and or drug-fueled Tour de France superhumans. There was this moment where, for an urban, affluent, performance-focused cyclist, this authentic brand came from nowhere and really did change the face of cycling. So if you were just landing today, or you're a Gen Zer getting into cycling, where does the Rapha brand and offering sit in this broad, cycling landscape?
I think to answer that question, you kind of need to go back to the start as well. And you've covered it in the sense of what the sport looked like, but also in terms of what the market looked like at that time. You had some very technical brands that were pushing forward with real performance fabrics or fits or whatever. You go back to 2004. Nothing like where we are today.
It's incredible.
But the brands existed, and there were brands that had been around already for a generation at that time. And then beyond that, basically everything was pretty cheap for the most part, poorly fitting and all that sort of stuff. And Simon felt that there was a place for a more discerning and more thoughtful product and brand, something that would tell the story, that would engage in cycling culture. And he blew it away by setting an RRP that was like 3 times the average at the time.
Yes.
It was nuts. You might remember, I certainly remember the first time you heard about how much a Rapha jersey costs.
I remember the conversations with my wife that started and ended with how much. So, I've lived through that.
Yeah, right. And in that, it probably took 5 years for most other brands to realize that they could sell, or that they should sell or aim to sell a product that could be justified at those higher price points. And then, Rapha's been on a really long journey of, like I said, it's changed the way people consume the sport. It's changed the stories that people paid attention to and the depth and the detail. And then over more recent years, the sport has continue to evolve to a place where you can go to Silverstone and spend £1,000 on a pair of aero socks, right? At one end of the really extreme of the sport, and you've got kind of very, very stylish brands that have maybe picked up learned from what Rapha did and tried to take that on in their own way. You've still got a kind of plethora of kind of core brands. And I think, one of the areas that Rapha's found hard over recent years, but was probably a huge benefit through like the peak COVID time, is Rapha has Rapha has extended its range to be able to cope with a broader church of cyclists, whether that's price point, whether that's function, whether that's terrain. Now, that works really well when the market's growing because it gives you lots more spaces to go into a growing market. It does have the risk of you standing for something less defined at a point when that market starts to contract, and it doesn't stop us still being a great and large brand at all, but it definitely means that your positioning is harder to explain. All that being said, is probably a very long way of saying we're still a premium brand, you're still from the top, or from halfway to the top, I would guess, of like the positioning. And we believe in the quality of our products, and in the main, we're direct to consumer, and that allows us to create great products for customers and feedback very quickly to iterate and improve.
I mean, it's interesting. We started talking about the customers. One of the things that's always interested me about the brand is that connection with the customer. And so a lot of brands might come technology first. I've got this new breathable fabric. What can I do with it? Where there's always been this focus on, you could sort of imagine the Rapha customer dressed in Rapha because you felt this visceral connection with them, which you see, I think, in two ways. One is with the clubhouses. So you're not a direct-to-customer selling brand. The customer's in your store doing things. So let's talk about those in a second. But I think there's also been, with this customer connection, a level of fun, and we're cycling with you. So whether it's doing the randonnées, whether it's sponsoring women's cycling, an early pioneer there, some of those nutty Cycle Across America gravel rides, all of that allied to a lot of video work to bring that to life. So it seems to me as if you know your customer and you're with them, this level of engagement, and also they're with you in the stores. So maybe just pick up on this clubhouse idea. Like, they're not your shops, they're your clubhouse. Yeah. I want to be sarcastic and say it's just a shop, but it's not just a shop. Tell us about the clubhouse.
Yeah, I mean, I think the clubhouse, again, they're a really amazing thing to go back to, because anyone who's into cycling these days is probably used to a cafe that they can ride their bike into, and that maybe has some cycling paraphernalia on the walls. But in 2010, 11, 12, this was not the norm, right? This is a fairly new thing. Cycling in cafes, and as with many things about cycling in cafes, permanent, right? Everyone has always met, whether it's Cafe Paradou in Crystal Palace or whatever, people have always met somewhere.
That's right.
And hung their bikes on the fence and gone for a ride, right?
Yeah.
That's
after 3 double espressos.
Yeah, right? That's cycling immortal, right? Like, always happened. But obviously, this brand was trying to bring that to a new generation at the time, or make it more accessible, make it more useful, like in the sense of like, how many places in Soho can you cycle and you're not going to hang your bike on the fence anymore, right? So being able to take it inside is suddenly a real value add. And we still see that. Lots of people will have ridden around Regent's Park and then they will come to the clubhouse and have a coffee, or maybe vice versa. And that's really been the logic of those stores around the world. And it's also, the brand was never purely about trying to sell product. Its purpose for 15 years was to try and grow the sport. And that's how we're doing that. You get on a Sunday afternoon, you give people a space to watch races. On a Wednesday morning, you give them a space to go after they've trained. And as part of that, the theory is they will want to shop with you, right?
Yeah.
And
also, they've got to wear their kit out somehow, so they can buy some more.
Yeah, well, and helping people ride. Yeah, you mentioned the rides that the brand has put on for a long time. And even before it kind of put on rides more formally, it would have appeared at people's rides. It did kind of guerrilla marketing at taps, to tour, and this sort of stuff. It was always trying to engage with people doing the sport, because it's a lifestyle sport. Like, it takes over your life, I guess, might be another way of putting it. Yeah. But it is something that, you can really engage with. And so they were telling these stories, telling these links, and really trying to create a community as well.
And I think what was nice about that is, because in retail, we have a large number of cyclists, but some of the one-day events, which would be teams of 4, where it was the slowest person's time that counted, not the fastest. Just these nice sort of community activities. But I mean, thinking about your clubhouses, I'd encourage everyone in the UK to visit your London one. But I can remember visiting San Francisco and doing a free bike hire where I'd pre-booked obviously, but I was handed this enormously expensive bike to go riding for the day. And the only difficulty was taking my own pedals, which was, I never understood why, but getting those through customs into San Francisco airport was quite funny. So you'd have the riding, but also then taking that onto things like Strava. So the community, there's a very active Rapha club on Strava. This idea that somehow the interest and joint activity brings people together.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, we track the data of the number of people who join rides in our various clubhouses around the world, right? It's like as you said, I mean, it's not as specific as wearing out kit, but it is the more people ride, the more they enjoy the sport, the more they'll tell their friends, the more they'll believe in this brand, the more they'll come back. And it's been really interesting. We've obviously had fairly major change here recently, and with Fran, our new CEO, she's brought in pros to come and talk to us. And what's fascinating when you listen to those pros is what they tell you about what was important to them about being a pro. And it's kind of like suffering together.
Yes.
One of the things they walk away from the sport going, that's the thing that I remember the most, and the connection I made with someone. So back to what you mentioned about the 4-person ride, and it's the time of the slowest rider. Well, what you go through on that is that shared experience that you probably never forget. You mentioned to me earlier your ride in Iceland. You don't forget these things. You forget them even less if they're shared.
Yes.
Which is a big part of the community of the sport, right? And that we can all go through that stuff and we all suffer. David Miller suffers, Teo Gegenhardt suffers, and Uri suffer. The famous, doesn't get any easier, you just go faster.
Exactly. And there is a point where you have to have a few more muscles when you run out of gears. So let's maybe just go back to the clubhouses, because we've seen your lovely website, we've seen the product, but the clubhouses are sort of quite different in the retail world. These are popping up in a number of cities. So I've visited Hong Kong, New York, San Francisco, obviously London. I think got a new one in Paris.
No, we haven't got one in Paris.
Why not?
No. Yeah, it's
Pourquoi
a
pas?
good question.
But actually, tell me where you put them and why.
Yeah. Well, historically, they've ended up... So originally, they went into the brightest and best cities in the world, right? So it's really obvious: London, New York, Tokyo, LA, the list of places that you would just really naturally put them. Then we can have a combination of, like, obviously as a kind of e-commerce site, you can actually see where people are shopping your brand. So you can you could create a list of places based off of, like, oh, well, that place is performing really well,
right?
Our brand, so maybe we should look at that. But also beyond that, there's the combination of the two things work together, right? When you put a store in a location, we grow our e-commerce sales. So, but actually, we also have a lot in, like, culturally important cycling locations. So there's one in Palma in Mallorca, we're in Boulder in Colorado. We're in places where you might not, if you were doing it on a purely financial grounds, at least just looking at, you did your data analysis of how many people live in that area. Could you put a brand? You're not going to put it in Mallorca, but actually Mallorca.
But when you think about the people who go there with their bikes, yes.
Exactly. It's very clear. And if you go back to bike hire suddenly makes even more sense for RCC members in a place like Mallorca. Suddenly this whole thing starts to come together and really the flywheel kicks off. And so there's a real combination of, like, the two in our portfolio of stores, and some will move. Some places have become cycling hubs that weren't 5 years ago. And there's Paris on the map. Well, of course it should be on the map. But Zurich or Vienna or some other places would be on the map. And we're in traditional cycling cities, Amsterdam, Copenhagen, but we're not in Oslo. Like, and we're not going to.
Right, well, maybe we should get our listener to volunteer on dates available to come for the Grand Paris opening. Now, we talked about RCC membership. It would be remiss of us to skip over that. So, as erstwhile member 7611, tell us a bit about where membership fits in. So it's a little bit more than give us your email, we'll spam you every Friday. It's a paid membership scheme. And in return, again, there aren't many benefits other than being able to buy even better kit. But maybe just tell me about how you see the membership scheme and how it fits in overall, how important it is to the commerce.
Yeah, so RCC Rapha Cycling Club launched in 2015, so it celebrates its 10th anniversary next year. And, I think it's an incredible example of understanding the sport. So most people would create a inverted commas loyalty scheme, and this would be about discounts or about access to product or about, special releases or whatever. And Simon built something, and the team built something that was really grounded in cycling clubs, creating a true Rapha cycling club, a community where people might meet and ride together, race together. It does have specific benefits in the sense of you get half price coffee if you go to a Clubhouse. You are allowed to, there's rides put on for you. You have bike hire benefits that you talked about. You get free express delivery. So it does have
and club kit, don't forget that.
And access to club kit, which is priced in a way that you don't get a discount on that, but it's priced lower than our range kit. So you have a full price offer, which is lower. And so it's we're definitely working on, it's a 10-year-old club, and how do we improve the proposition of the club and move it forward? But I think it's also a tremendous, it's been a tremendous success. It peaked in COVID, as did the brand, and as did lots of other measures of cycling. And so we're ardently aware that we need to reinvigorate the club. But at its core, it's probably got a pretty solid proposition for a lot of people. I mean, if you live near a Clubhouse,
absolutely,
then it makes, half price coffee and free express. If you're riding regularly and you want to join RCC rides, you travel once a year and you want to pick up one of the amazing bikes that we will allow you to hire.
Yeah. It pays for itself.
Yeah.
But I think for me, what's interesting is that re-anchoring of a membership. It's all about doing. If you participate and you attend the Clubhouse and all of this sort of physical, real action, it's not just a loyalty scheme, vouchers and points. So I think that working together is really important. One other topic I wanted to pick up on before we loop back to you is sustainability. So when I remember being in a change room once and squeezing myself into a garment, there's a sign on the wall saying that if through cycling you lose weight, the garment becomes too big, then you get 50% off the smaller size. And I'm still trying to get to a point where I can take you up on that. But next to it, then there was, a pair of bibs with holes in because some would come off. And it was like, if you come off, we'll fix it free or give you a replacement or something. So there's always been this idea that you stand behind the kit. But the importance of sustainable products has really accelerated. So I was at Makers Unite in Amsterdam last year, and alongside all the premium brands, there was Rapha kit being expertly fixed by people. So maybe just tell us how sustainability is getting woven into the brand offering and how important that is.
Yeah, I mean, I think at its core, cycling does something which not that many sports can do, which is, you can, if you're a conscious consumer, be more environmentally friendly cycling. You can playing golf, assuming that you were going to drive to that golf course.
Yeah.
So it can do stuff which other sports can't. And then what that does is attracts lots of people who care maybe more about, or at least care in equal measure about their impact as well as the sport that they do. And lots of people, it's an adventurous holiday pursuit or a way of saving money to commute or all those kind of things. So that's kind of deep in the brand. And then that lines up really well with the quality, which has kind of always been central to the brand. And so, yeah, I've got a jersey from 2008, which I could still pull on. And
you're showing off.
Yeah. And now the colours faded a bit, and Simon did want Sofa to replace it, but I thought it had too many memories.
Exactly. The memory is important. Yeah.
But yeah, so you certainly have a situation where the kit has always really lasted a long time. And then, yeah, I mean, before sustainability, we did repair. So, before sustainability was a thing, we were focused on high quality kit that would last a long time, and then combining that with repair. And we have a pair of Chris Froome's bib shorts that were repaired post Tour de France, and it's always been a factor, and it still is. Like, we have repair centres in the US and the UK and in Europe. The one you mentioned in Amsterdam, where we will send people's kit to be repaired because this is premium, expensive kit.
Yeah.
And if a small stitch line comes loose, then it's a shame to throw it away.
Absolutely.
And then, as we've gone on, it's become more important to obviously our own impact on the environment, be that through carbon emissions, or when you're a brand like ours, you'll have fairly significant emissions when it comes to logistics, but actually most of your emissions are probably further upstream. So we look at our scope 3 carbon emissions. We try to work on how we can reduce those, try to work with our factories on what we can do. We've had a big push on what internally we call environmentally preferred materials, and to try and make them feature across as much of the range as possible. We release an impact report annually. So we are conscious of our impact, and for any brand that's trying to sell product, there's that kind of push-pull of like, you need to try and sell enough of it to keep your business going, and you don't want people to buy so much of it that you are a mass polluter or that sort of thing. And I think cycling has some real challenges in the sense, like, just the materials, like they tend to be made out of multiple materials because you're looking for stretch and fit and water resistance. Also, that makes the material incredibly hard to recycle, maybe very expensive to produce. You've got chamois that are made out of foam. You'd be amazed how much waste there is in the chamois. So we know what problems that, if we go beyond environmentally preferred materials, we know what the problems are, which we need to try and solve.
Yeah.
Whether they impact the average consumer, that's always the difficult bit, but we know they are part of our impact on the planet.
Good. Well, as you're talking, I was thinking about the long stretch of continual small improvements and how they add up over time. But it also made me remember that when we look at your CV, you have spent a lifetime dedicated to two-wheeled retail. So maybe just draw for people who can't get their thumbs to LinkedIn just now, your career from Evans, Brompton, and now Rapha. What was the line to that? Did you just say, I'm only going to work for bike companies, whatever happens, or was it accidental?
It's funny, actually, because it was kind of the opposite. So while I was studying, I worked in an Evans Cycles part-time. I was actually very lucky.
No.
Yeah, I was very lucky that, like, in my first week at, actually the first uni that I went to and I left, but in my first week of first uni, in the basement of my halls, opened an Evans Cycles, which is one that's now shut in Holborn, and I got a job there. And I'd been a super keen cyclist all through my teens, and I worked at Evans for about 4 years at university, and then asked them if they had a better job because I didn't have any idea what I wanted to do. And
this is because you initially started off studying philosophy, of course. So no one can expect you to know what you want to do, because is that even a question?
Well, yeah, exactly. Which is why after a year I gave up philosophy, because if you're still worrying about the question after 12 months, it's probably time to find something more practical to do. Yeah, so then I was studying physics, and then, I was incredibly lucky, really, that the job that they had was a job that I guess required numeracy, that was in the purchasing department, and I did my last exam on the Thursday and I started there on the Monday, and then the point on will I commit to two wheels is, I remember going to a show and people saying to me after I'd been working there 3 months, and they were like, "Oh, you'll be a lifer now, you're a lifer now," and they made it sound like it was something really bad. And I remember walking away from that show thinking, I won't be a lifer. And
20 years later.
Yeah, 20 years later, here I am. Yeah. But I think, you mentioned how cycling brings together lots of people who you know through retail. But my amazing experience was, like, when you do cycling retail, you make really close friends because you've already passed the bar of we're all cyclists, and then you can go to the people you have that even deeper connection with.
Yeah.
And so it became, and I guess at heart, it costs some energy and some environmental impact to produce, but fundamentally what we're doing used well has a positive impact on the environment and on someone's health and on the long term. I mean, I always enjoyed it, right? I've loved bikes since I learned to ride. And so, yeah, those things combined, that's very serendipitous.
But you started off in a junior role, rose to the ranks, then moved to Brompton. And we interviewed Brompton on the podcast back in January. We're talking to the US team, in particular about Brompton Junction. So that sort of clubby, more than just a shop approach has a parallel with your clubhouses, except it seems to be more about connecting the urban cyclist rather than them being about performance and riding together afterwards. It's kind of a similar but different approach. So to what extent would you draw a comparison or difference between what are basically two strong British brands led by charismatic, quality focused leaders, so that move from Brompton to Rapha, where was the difference? Where are the similarities?
Oh, I mean, I've been incredibly lucky to work for both brands, right? But
it is quite a double, actually. It's got to be said.
Yeah, there's a few people who have dragged over since, and a couple of people who went the other way, maybe to get away. But it was very interesting. You mentioned charismatic, so it was very interesting talking to Will Butler Adams when I was leaving Brompton, and the conversation I was having with him was, I was like, going from a product with a real point of difference, and a Brompton, for anyone,
is actually unique.
It is the best, right? And as a business, it's mind-blowing because you go into a factory and tubes come in one end and bikes
were the other. Yeah,
that factory's in London and you just can't comprehend it. And that is a village creating these bikes. It's an amazing place to work, and so lucky to have been able to work on that and some really exciting stuff during my time there. And then, you move to a brand like Rapha, which it has a heart and soul, which is different, but you have to be interested enough to figure that out. And otherwise, if you stood back and you just, how much or whatever, it's cycling kit, right? And to me, I love this brand as well. I've been a customer of this brand for a long time. It definitely changed my relationship with cycling. And so the chance to come here and try and get it to, back to kind of the real peak of the market was easily something that, really excited me. And at times, is scary and challenging.
So let's look forward then. Let's look at that because, there's too much stuff in the world, not enough attention, not enough money. So as you look to the future with a brand like Rapha, but there are others like it in terms of integrity, product history, and so on. If you were hiring or talking to people who wanted to get into a similar brand-led business, what are the important skills needed in order to get that balance between absolute integrity with no growth, talking to the same people, and then the whole sort of, we put one on every high street, PE-fueled explosion, which ultimately leads to dilution and so on. So somewhere in that super happy but small to temporarily happy, what are the skills needed to navigate? And, while you're thinking of your chance, we've seen this with great brands, it's Sweaty Betty on the one hand, owner, founder, real points of difference. How do these brands grow? So if you step out of yourself, you're talking to a young person arriving post-philosophy physics degree, what are the characteristics that are needed in order for the brand to get and maintain its place?
I think, you, particularly in an enthusiast brand like this, you've got to have a relentless desire to understand the customer. And I remember talking to Simon in 2015 or something, and he was explaining to me, I was at Evans at the time, and we were kind of comparing experiences and saying how, like, Evans at the time actually surprised people how into cycling the head office was. So you'd arrive and people would maybe come with an image that Evans was like a big box and they wouldn't really be into cycling. They would arrive and there'd be bikes everywhere. People would be sat in the cycling kit and they'd be riding at lunchtime. And, it was really, there were a lot of very, very keen.
And also last century, down in Waterloo at the FW Evans, people actually made the bikes there. And that, that was a real point of competitive difference then.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And so 100% for Evans. Yeah. And I think, actually, like if I step back slightly, what I learned at Evans was I had a chip on my shoulder when I started there. And then I had this experience of like going to Canada and working in a small store that was like my dream kind of shop. I had a coffee shop in it. It had trays that finished at the door. It was, did everything. But I kept turning people away because we didn't have their products. And this light bulb went off. I was like, I'm not an Evans Cycles customer. But for its customers, Evans Cycles is amazing.
So that knowledge of the customer.
Yeah, knowledge of the customer. And then when you come here, and to go back to the conversation I was referencing with Simon, he was sort of saying, well, this brand, Rapha, needs to always be more cycling than its customers. And I think at some point that probably became a ring around the neck because you got to a point where the stories were so niche because you were trying to continue, they were at like PhD in 1950s cycling, and the reality is that most of the customers would have been happy with something at a much lighter level than that. So there's an element of like, how far can you take that? But there's certainly, you'll only create great products, you'll only create a great experience, because fundamentally it isn't about the product. You'll only create a great experience, whether that's in the purchase journey, whether that's in riding it, whether that's in the community, whether that's in riding or the coffee shop, if you really get what it is that people love about your niche. Now, I'm lucky this is my niche and this is our sport and this is something that lots of people do, and I'm lucky to be able to do that. I think to be able to do it well, that's why I referenced the Canadian story, to be able to do it well, you do have to be one step back, because you might be the customer, you might need to think like the customer, but you also need to challenge yourself and check whether you are.
You still are the customer.
Still are, yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Right. And you won't always be in, because you'll have your own quirks. And so you need to be able to do both those things. But if you don't have the hunger and the interest, then you're never going to create anything amazing, because you won't be able to go to that depth that the new to or even the experienced customer just wouldn't have done. And you have to be able to provide that surprise, that reward for the person who loves the sport.
Great. Well, look, time's nearly up. You've got a day job to get back to. So thanks for taking the time. But as we sort of pack up, anything you're thinking, thank God Ian's leaving because I can crack on with interesting project X or Y. What's exciting you as you head off?
Yeah, what a time to be here, really, because Fran Miller has just joined as our new CEO.
From Belstaff.
And previously time with Team Ineos and Team Sky. So cycling through and through. Obviously, her brother was David Miller. So she's...
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So she's got...
Oh my God, autograph time needed.
Yeah. So it's incredible, right? And the brand's taken a few punches over the last few years, definitely.
But also some of that's from lookalike brands who've learned from what you've done and seen that power of, the sort of upper end of cycling, activity.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. And did you keep innovating, right? Did you keep pushing on so they couldn't catch you? So it's a really exciting time. It's very early days in terms of what that will mean for strategy, for product, for experience. But that's what we're working on. We're working at a really high pace. Anyone who's worked at Fran seems to be fully aware of the pace that you end up going. And so that means, every day we're trying to answer kind of big decisions about what we should be doing next, or maybe spending the time to research and understand a bit more. Yeah. And then, it's, Belstaff was for her, it's an incomparable brand. It's 100 years old. It's motorcycling. But it's a very comparable brand. It's a British. They are heritage. I don't think we are heritage, but we're.
But it's also interesting. I'm just going to segue to their New York meatpacking store, which was 2 years ago one of my top US store choices, because they're this amazing setup in the store with this guy called Raphael who would customize, age, repair. It was this sort of tailoring concierge service, but in full sight of the customer, conversation, Q&A, the whole thing. It was both theatre and real at the same time. So there was a time when, Belsoff was really leaning into these are important garments for people who love them.
Yeah, exactly right. And it's like she gets brands and she gets spirit and she's deep on the customer, right? And so that's a great time to be here, because we're not talking about how we're going to eke out 1/4 of a point of margin or that sort of things. Those things come, but they come when you do a great job. So yeah, it might be all change and no change. We'll see,
That sounds like you're volunteering to come back on another podcast next year and tell us what happened.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe. Actually, the conversations that we've had are over trying to look further forward than that, because I think so often in retail, it's easy to go, I've got to fix it next year. I've got 12 months to fix this thing. We're very lucky. We've got owners who have been very patient with this brand, and they want to get it right. And so we're going to look 3 to 4 year strategy to rebuild this place. So it might be I'm a bit older and grayer the next time we speak, but yeah.
It's fine. This is why we don't do video podcasts, because, for the listener, we're all handsome and young. Well, Joel, on that note of happy youth and good looks, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you very much, Ian.